Hey YouTube, this is City Prepping. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to go over various books, 10 primary categories of different books that you'd want to have either to learn prepper skills in your journey or books that you would want to have on hand if the grid were to go down, the internet were to go down, because we take so much for granted that we can just go to our phone, we can Google something and look up information. But if there was an event and the internet's down for a prolonged period of time, having these actual physical hard copy books would be so useful. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go over 10 main categories. We're going to cover the books that stand out in each category, and then I'll provide additional books within that category that really provide great supplemental information. And again, I'll give you tons of options, but for each one, I'll describe a book, or rather reference a book that I think really stands out. And if you want to check out any of these books, I'll put links in the description and comment section below. All right, so let me start off by saying this. If you could only buy 3 books, let me start off with the ones that I would recommend. The first, and this is the first one I got when I really got serious about prepping years ago, is the SAS Survival Guide. This one just has a lot of great practical, useful information on survival. The next one that's very similar is called When All Hell Breaks Loose. Now, I just picked this up, and I've read a lot of resources that reference this book as another very practical book to have on hand if there were a disaster or just basic skills that you would want to learn. And this is something I'm going to actually be spending a lot of time learning myself. And then this last one, and I've referenced this many times on the channel before, is the Survival Medicine Handbook. This is from Dr. Joe Alton and Nurse Amy of the YouTube channel Doom and Bloom. They've been guests on my channel several times in the past. And again, this is one of the first, when I first got serious about prepping, I picked up this book, and then I also picked up the SAS Survival Guide. So having covered those first 3, if that's all you could get, that's probably where I would start. Okay, so let's jump into the first category. And I purposely chose this one to begin with as medical. I chose it because if there was a true event, disaster, let's say earthquake, natural disaster, or otherwise in your area, I would want good, solid medical information on hand for myself and my family. It's just something that I would really want if time was sensitive. So the first one, and we already pointed out, is the Survival Medicine Handbook by Dr. Joe Alton and Nurse Amy. And then the second one, and this is kind of in a more protracted grid down situation, is When There Is No Dentist. Again, this was written for developing nations that may not have any kind of dentist in their area. So it's just written from a very practical, basic standpoint to help someone with dental issues. If you've ever had any kind of a toothache or anything, you know how serious that can be. All right, let's move to the next category, which is food. Now for food, the first one I would recommend, and this one has sold millions of copies. This is, not a prepper book. This is just a good, solid book to teach you learning skills on home, preserving food. And it's whenever I did research, it always comes up as one of the most recommended for any type of food preservation. Now these other books that I'm going to recommend, again, I'll post links to all these. These are just good supplemental books. This one is called Food Storage. It's a great primer if you get serious about storing food. It's a little different than food preserving. It goes into the details of, how you, store food and water. I think it's a good solid primer prepper book for storage. The next one, and I think someone sent this to me, is the Pioneer Cookbook Recipes for Today's Kitchen. What it does is it goes over a lot of traditional meals based on food that you may have stored away, especially if you followed any of the videos where I talk about various food items I'd recommend you store. This next one is specific to preppers. It's called the Prepper's Cookbook. Kind of same concept. A lot of the videos I do on my channel, like the 3-week emergency food supply, the 1 year, I recommend various food items, and this book covers a lot of those. Now, this was another book sent to me as well. You can have your food storage and eat it as well. This really gets into more of the food items that you would want to store, and again, it aligns with the ones I've covered, but it shows you how to rotate those into daily meals. I think that's a really good, and that's, again, the key with storing food is you want to rotate it in. Same thing, cooking with home storage, very similar concept. And then the last one is the meals in a jar. I use this one for a while, and it's great because you can set up practical meals that you can actually store away in a jar. A lot of this is using freeze-dried ingredients, or if you have a freeze dryer like a Harvest Right freeze dryer, which I've covered on the channel before, this allows you to put together food items that you can store away and just use in your daily diet and for emergencies as well. All right, let's move to the next category, which is gardening. Now, when I first got serious about gardening years ago, I started off with this one. It's the all-new Square Foot Gardening. This is version 2. I don't know if they have a newer one wouldn't be surprised, but it's an extremely, extremely popular book. And again, I start off referencing this one because a lot of gardeners, when they start, they usually recommend that one. A few other books, and this is not a gardening book. Well, I'll put this one last. How about that? This one is called Gaia's Garden. I hear this one referenced all the time. I've used some of the information inside, and again, it's more of a, I believe, from a permaculture standpoint versus traditional gardening. So if you're interested in going down that route, permaculture, that's a good option. This one is what I'm going to be studying next, the DIY hydroponic gardens. I've mentioned this several times on the channel recently. I'm setting up a vertical grow space in a shed in my backyard here in the next few months, and I'll be learning from that. There's one other book. I didn't have it. I searched for like 15 minutes before doing this video, but it's called, I think it's called, oh yeah, Carrots Love Tomatoes. And I don't have it. My wife's using it as we are working on planting out our garden this spring. It's a book on companion planting. It shows what plants you should plant next to each other in proximity, some will help each other produce certain, what am I trying to say? Well, some will fertilize the soil better for others. Some will produce different defensive mechanisms that will, preserve and protect other plants in the other area. So my wife always uses that book every time she starts off a garden to get ideas of what to plant next to each other. And this last one, it's not a gardening book, but it's The Forager's Harvest. And again, whenever I've read different foraging references, they usually point back to this one. This is more of a going out into the wild and learning where to find certain foods and which ones to actually use, or rather collect. Okay. So we've gone through so far medical, cooking, gardening. Now let's move over to a little more of a kind of similar but a little more advanced topic of homesteading. So if you really get serious in saying, hey, look, I want to take my backyard, if I have land or even a suburban backyard, and I want to begin to grow in a little more self-sufficient kind of way versus just traditional garden, beginning to think a little more broader. This is the one that always comes up in my research. And I just picked this up this week and I studied it. It's called John Seymour's A Self-Sufficient Life and How to Live It. How would I put this? As I've studied it, it's a little more advanced. It's kind of assumes you have land, but it goes pretty much into all the details of everything that you want to need and know. So definitely out of all the books that we're about to cover, that's the one that usually stands out. Now on that note, for a little more simple but similar in a kind of a smaller area is the backyard homestead. And again, similar concept, but a little more basic, a little more practical, I think. For especially suburban environments. And I just happen to have this one, the Chicken Whisperer's Guide to Keeping Chickens. Honestly, in all the years that I've had chickens, it's been pretty easy. I really haven't had to read too much about them. They've been pretty easy, but if you want to go into depth, that one is definitely one. Now this next one, I just picked this up this week, and I just brought it up because I thought, since I'm going to be learning, it'd be worth mentioning, is harvesting rainwater. I'm going to be building out my rainwater system, harvesting system, that I have on the side of my house, and I'm going to expand that out. So I'm interested to see what I can learn. Now this one is called the Foxfire series. In the context or rather discussion of homesteading, this one comes up a lot. And whenever I do these videos on books, I recommend people always say, hey, next time bring up the Foxfire series. So again, it's more of the old ways of doing things. It's kind of a look back and, making moonshine, a lot of the traditional older ways that people did things. Okay, so I swapped out the books for the next set of categories that we'll go over. The first in those is prepper, kind of survival specific types of books, I would kind of classify that as. And the first one is When All Hell Breaks Loose. This is the one that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Out of all these, this is the one that constantly keeps coming up as one that most people recommend, that gets a lot of popular or good reviews. The next one is, and I've heard this one referenced a lot, is How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It. And again, just a very kind of a practical how-to if the grid were to go down. This one I've had for a while. It's a real simple, but it's called the Prepper's Pocket Guide. A lot of little small, kind of simple things. I think it's a good primer if you're starting out and you just want to know the basics. Can't go wrong with that. The next one is Prepper's Long-Term Survival Guide. And this one is by, I believe, Jim Cobb. I want to say, Jim, yep. I used to read his books a lot when I first got serious about preparedness. Again, just, a lot of things to consider if you're having to live on your own for a while. This next one is 52 Prepper Projects. I've had people reach out and say, hey, what would you recommend if you just want to learn preparedness in a year? A lot of simple projects. Yeah, something like this would be easy to follow along with. They're not that advanced. I've heard this one often referenced a lot of Survival Mom. Same thing, just, kind of covers all the basics of what you would need to know for survival and getting your house ready, etc. And then we already covered the SAS Survival Guide at the beginning of the video. And, between all of these books, the two that I think really stand out in this category is When All Hell Breaks Loose and the SAS Survival Guide. If I had to go down to one, I'd probably get the SAS, but that's the ones in that category. Now, the next one up is home repair, and we don't often think about that. If we're out on our own, or the grid goes down, or there's a lot of issues, internet issues, or just, you have to learn how to do this stuff on your own, the complete do-it-yourself guide. I've got some of my in the garage from, I think, Reader's Digest. They're a lot older. This one is just a more updated version of that. Again, a lot of practical DIY. So let's just say there's a situation, you need to know how to work on various things around your house. The internet's not available. It's a good primer and a good book on that. Now, our next category up is what I would consider some type of defense, self-defense type of books where you have to, take care of yourself. So the first one up that I would recommend, and I often hear this in the reviews, is 100 Deadly Skills. I believe, it was written by a Navy SEAL operator, and it gets a lot of positive reviews. And kind of scanning through it, reading it before this video, I thought I had a lot of good information, practical stuff, just kind of things to put away in the back of your mind. And then the last one is, and I believe this one's also by Jim Cobb, this one is A Prepper's Home Defense. It looks at it more from the prepper's perspective of how you could defend and prepare your house, if things went sideways. Okay, so the next category is what I would kind of branch off some of these prepper books, and when we get into more specific type of things is, disaster specific is, I guess, what I'm looking for. And at the time of recording this video, we're in 2003, and obviously nuclear issues, nuclear wars are weighing heavily on a lot of people. This one is the United States Armed Forces Survival Manual on this subject. So again, that's one. The other one is Nuclear War Survival Skills. I bought this one a while back, and feels odd having to talk about these books living in the day and age that we are now. Feels like that's something that we should have dealt with a long time ago, but here we are. Okay, and the last two that I'll talk about, first of the two, is finances. Now, a lot of people don't tie those together with preparedness because, I don't know, we often see that as, well, why do I need to deal with finances? The reason being is if you've got into prepping for any length of time, you know that it takes money. It's not cheap to secure gear and the different, store away certain amounts of food, etc. So I think it's important that people at least understand how to get a good hold on their finances. And the first one I recommend, and again, this is just for my own personal use. I'm sorry you can't see that there, but this is Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace. When my wife and I first got serious about our finances back in, when we first got married, this one really enabled us to get out of debt quickly. And I will say this about it. It's good to a point. It just teaches you the basics. A lot of people are financially illiterate. They don't even, a lot of times it's just not something that people naturally want to do, is store away money, save, live within their means, etc. So it really enabled us and got us on a fast path to get out of debt. Now, the next one up, and by the way, these books I'm referencing, please don't say, well, I've heard this about Dave Ramsey, or I've heard this about, Robert Kiyosaki or Grant Cardone. The more I read about these individuals, some of them kind of, I wouldn't say gone off the rails, but I know Robert Kiyosaki, he seems to have gotten into some issues lately with some of his courses. But the book, I loved it, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. This one really, after reading Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace, this one really got me to reconsider how I view money. I made some pretty big decisions in my life based off that book. And the next one, and I'll talk a little more about some specific Robert Kiyosaki books that I would recommend. But the next one up is The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. And this guy's book, I don't know, it just really kind of lights a fire under your seat if you want to get serious about moving ahead in life, finances, just getting more aggressive, I guess is the term I'm looking for. But it's one that has enabled me to rethink how I approach finances and other just business, etc. So definitely a good read. Now, I did hold these off to the end when we talk about finances. Let me actually go through these. I started really enjoying Robert Kiyosaki's book. This one is Rich Dads Increase Your Financial IQ. This one is a cash flow quadrant. That one was really an eye-opener for me. Just, again, kind of got me rethinking how I view money. Unfair advantage. And then this one, I don't know. I didn't necessarily like it so much. Guide to Investing. It felt like it was written by somebody else. It wasn't really in his style. But anyway, those are the ones that I found useful. Now, the last book, set of books category, I kind of label this as future, and what I mean by future is really getting a grasp and understanding from people that are way smarter than I could ever be, but people that dedicate their time and energy and have teams to do so, is really understanding where things are going. And this one, I've referenced it many times on the channel. This is from Ray Dalio, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. He's got a video with the same title on YouTube. It's 43 minutes long, and I always tell people, look, if you want to understand where things are heading, I think it's an excellent video. It's 43 minutes, but every second is really full, and there's a lot that you can learn. So the other book that two other books I'm reading, I don't have the books because they're audio books, but the first one is Peter Zeihan's The End of the World is Just the Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalization. If I would say you've got Ray Dalio on one side giving one view, you've got Peter Zeihan on the other side giving, I wouldn't say a contrary view, but they see things in a different perspective of where things are going. But the thing they both agree on is it is a changing world and you better get ready for it. So I find that they're both useful to kind of give me balance and perspective of where things are heading. The other one, and it's a bit dry, I'll admit it, but I found it very fascinating, was The Sovereign Individual. It was a book that was written in '99 before the switch over to 2000, and they were trying to kind of look ahead the next 20, 30 years where things are heading. And I enjoyed it. You're seeing a lot of what they're describing playing out in real time. So I'll provide links to all the books that I covered here, some of the audio books as well. What do you think? Did I miss anything? Would you include something different? Again, these are just what I found to be useful over the last several years. And again, I'll put asterisks next to each one of the categories of the books that really stand out within that category, so you don't say, well, gosh, I'm not going to buy all these 30, 40 books, but the ones that I would say stand out. And again, I'll reference the three that if you're like, hey, just what three would you say from a survival standpoint are really a good place to start? I'll put links to those. Again, I'd welcome your feedback, and as always, stay safe out there.